Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs as he burst through the boardroom doors, shouting words that shattered the corporate hierarchy. "This building will collapse." The executives lunged across the polished table to silence him, unaware that the floor beneath them had already begun to crack. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. "This building will collapse." The words tore through the crisp afternoon air, raw and desperate. Marcus Langley froze, his presentation laser pointer still aimed at quarterly projections that no longer mattered. The boardroom fell silent, all eyes turning to the doorway where a man in a gray maintenance uniform stood, his face pale and slick with sweat. Vincent Torres, head of building maintenance, had burst through the double doors of the executive suite on the 47th floor, interrupting the most important board meeting of the fiscal year. His eyes were wide, fixed on Marcus, pleading, "You need to evacuate, now." Benjamin Reeves, head of security, moved as one with his deputy. They converged on Vincent, a ghost materializing from the building's service corridors. Reeves placed himself squarely between Marcus and Vincent, his body a solid wall. "Stand down," Reeves commanded, his voice a low growl. The deputy grabbed Vincent, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall of Langley Industries' executive boardroom. Vincent's breath left him in a pained grunt, his ID badge clattering to the polished floor. "Everyone needs to leave," Vincent gasped, craning his neck to keep his eyes on Marcus. "Please, structural integrity compromised. Can't stay here, dots." Single quotes. Marcus's shock curdled into icy irritation. The quarterly financials were trending upward for the first time in 18 months. The board was finally warming to his leadership after the tumultuous transition following his father's death. This interruption was unacceptable. A dereliction. "Reeves, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Who let this man into my boardroom?" Vincent Torres. "Sir," Reeves said, his eyes surveying the room, noticing for the first time the slight swaying of the crystal chandelier, the microscopic cracks forming at the corners of the ceiling. His hand drifted to the inside of his jacket. "He's head of maintenance. He's doing his job," Vincent cut in, his voice cracking. "The building's main support column has been compromised. I was monitoring the structural integrity sensors. They're all red. The east face is shifting. We have minutes. Maybe less." Single quotes. The word hung in the air. Minutes. In Marcus Langley's world, it was a word processed through a dozen filters of risk assessment and corporate responsibility. But shouted by a frantic maintenance worker in a boardroom on the 47th floor, it meant only one thing. Reeves's eyes narrowed. He looked at the slight tremble of water in crystal glasses on the table, then back at Vincent's terrified face. Protocol took over, cold and swift. "Sir, we need to evacuate now," he said to Marcus, his tone no longer a suggestion. He gestured to his deputy. "Trip the alarm. Full building evacuation. Get emergency services on the line." Marcus's jaw tightened. "An evacuation, Reeves? This is absurd." The man is clearly. A deep, ominous groan cut through his words, the sound of metal under impossible strain. The boardroom windows floor to ceiling glass, offering panoramic views of the city, developed a hairline fracture that raced from floor to ceiling in the blink of an eye. The board members rose from their seats in unison, faces pale. "Everyone out, now!" Reeves barked, no longer concerned with protocol or deference. Within seconds, the polished decorum of the board meeting dissolved into barely controlled panic. Board members grabbed phones and tablets, abandoning leather portfolios and coffee cups. The building's alarm system began to wail, the strobe lights casting the room in rhythmic pulses of red. Marcus stood rooted, watching his carefully orchestrated world crumble. The quarterly presentation, the strategic realignment, the confidence-building exercise this meeting was supposed to be, all of it now a heap of smoking ruins. "Sir," Vincent said, now standing directly in front of him, no longer restrained, "I've triggered the emergency protocols. The evacuation is underway, but you need to lead it. People will follow you." Marcus stared at this man, this maintenance worker he'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing. This nobody, who had just shattered the facade of control he'd spent years perfecting. A second groan, louder than the first, shook the room. Dust drifted down from ceiling tiles. The conference table shifted as the floor beneath it developed an almost imperceptible tilt. Vincent grabbed Marcus's arm. "I need to show you something, then you'll understand." Against his better judgment, against every instinct screaming at him to flee, Marcus followed Vincent to the windows. The maintenance chief pointed to the adjacent tower, Langley Industries' east wing, connected to the main building by a series of elevated walkways. From this vantage point, the horror was undeniable. The east wing was listing its normally perfect right angles now off by several degrees. As they watched, a shower of glass cascaded from the 30th floor, glittering like deadly diamonds as it rained down on the evacuation zone below. "My God," Marcus breathed. "Construction crew hit something they shouldn't have during the renovation," Vincent explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Compromised the main support column. I've been monitoring the sensors all morning. They've been showing increased stress. 10 minutes ago, they all went critical." Reeves appeared at Marcus's side. "Sir, we need to go. Now." The deputy approached, face grim. "Emergency services are on their way. They think it's a drill." Marcus looked from the deputy to Vincent, then to the board members still hesitating by the door, uncertain whether to wait for their CEO or save themselves. In that moment, something shifted inside Marcus Langley. The mantle of leadership his father had passed to him, that he'd worn so uneasily these past 18 months, suddenly felt right. Not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Broadcast system, he said, his voice steady. I need to address the building. Vincent nodded. Emergency management office. 1 floor down, go, Marcus commanded the board members. Exit via the west stairwell. Reeves, ensure they get out safely. Before anyone could protest, he was moving. Vincent at his side. They burst into the stairwell, the sound of thousands of evacuating employees already filling the concrete chamber with echoing footsteps and anxious voices. Make way, Vincent shouted as they descended, creating a path through the crowd. They emerged on the 46th floor, pushing through throngs of confused employees who were gathering belongings, moving with the unhurried pace of people who believed they were participating in a routine drill. The emergency management office was a small, windowless room dominated by screens monitoring every floor of the complex. Half a dozen security personnel manned the stations, their faces tense as they coordinated the evacuation. Mr. Langley, the lead officer said, surprise evident in her voice. You should be evacuating, sir. Building-wide broadcast, Marcus said, ignoring the comment. Now, she hesitated only a second before handing him a microphone. Channel open, sir. Marcus took a breath, looking at the monitors showing crowded stairwells and elevator lobbies where people waited impatiently, checking watches, scrolling through phones. This is Marcus Langley, he began, his voice echoing throughout the entire complex. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. The East Wing structural integrity has been compromised. The building is in imminent danger of collapse. He paused, watching the monitors, his head snapped up, bodies tensed. Proceed immediately to your nearest emergency exit. Do not use the elevators. Do not return for personal belongings. Move quickly, but orderly. Lives depend on every second. On the screens, the transformation was instant. The languid evacuation became purposeful, urgent. People moved with new determination, shepherding others toward exits, abandoning desks and belongings without a backward glance. This is why I came to you, Vincent said quietly, standing at Marcus's shoulder. They needed to hear it from you. Before Marcus could respond, a violent tremor shook the room. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before emergency power kicked in. Status report, the lead officer barked into her headset. East Wing junction showing critical stress, came the response, crackling with static. Structural failure cascade initiating on floors 27 through 35. Single quotes. Vincent's face went ashen. It's starting. We're out of time. Marcus looked at the evacuation progress on the monitors. Thousands still inside. Hundreds in the East Wing alone. The walkways, he said suddenly. Are people still using the connecting walkways from the East Wing? Yes, the officer confirmed. It's the fastest route out for anyone above the 30th floor in that section. Single quotes. Marcus met Vincent's eyes, a silent question passing between them. They'll collapse first, Vincent confirmed. Those walkways won't survive the shifting foundation. Single quotes. Marcus grabbed the microphone again. All personnel in the East Wing. The connecting walkways are compromised. Do not attempt to cross. Repeat, do not use the walkways. Proceed to ground level via internal stairwells only. On one monitor, he could see people hesitating at a walkway entrance, looking uncertainly at the main tower just 30 feet away. So close, yet suddenly unreachable. Another tremor, stronger than the last. The emergency management office's ceiling tiles crashed down, showering them with debris. A monitor exploded in a shower of sparks. We need to go, Vincent urged, pulling at Marcus's arm. Now. But Marcus couldn't tear his eyes from the screens, from the thousands of people who worked for him, who trusted him, who were now running for their lives. Not yet, he said. There's something else we need to do first. The emergency management screens told a harrowing story. Thousands of employees streamed down stairwells, their faces tight with controlled panic. But on the 36th floor of the East Wing, a red warning flashed. Camera feed showed a group of executives still in their conference room, seemingly oblivious to the evacuation order. Who are they? Marcus demanded, pointing at the screen. International investors, the security officer replied. They're in a soundproofed room for a confidential presentation. The alarm system in there must have malfunctioned. Marcus grabbed the microphone again. Security team to 36 East. Conference room C. Emergency evacuation required. He looked at Vincent. Will that reach them? Vincent shook his head. Soundproofing. And if the alarm system failed, ... Single quotes. He didn't need to finish the thought. Another tremor rocked the building, stronger than before. A support beam crashed through the ceiling, missing Marcus by inches. Plaster dust filled the air. We need to go there, Marcus said. Decision made. Now, sir, that's suicide, the security officer protested. The East Wing is filled with my people, Marcus cut her off. Patch me through to Reeves. The chief of security's voice crackled over the comms. Sir, are you still in the building? You need to evacuate immediately. Reeves, there are people trapped on 36 East. The alarm system failed. They don't know. A moment of silence. I'm on my way back up. No. Marcus countered. Focus on the ground floor evacuations. Make sure everyone who gets out stays out and moves away from the building perimeter. Vincent grabbed Marcus's arm. The service elevator. The elevators are locked down in an emergency, the security officer reminded. Maintenance override, Vincent replied, already moving toward the door. It's our fastest way there. Marcus followed without hesitation. The hallway outside was eerily empty now, the overhead lights flickering ominously. They ran to a nondescript door marked maintenance only at the end of the corridor. Vincent swiped his badge and punched a code into the keypad. The door unlocked with a metallic clunk. Behind it was a service elevator, smaller, more utilitarian than the sleek passenger elevators that serviced the building. This operates on a separate system, Vincent explained, inserting a key into the control panel, designed to function during maintenance emergencies. Like building collapse? Marcus asked grimly. Vincent managed a tight smile, not exactly what the engineers had in mind. The elevator lurched to life, descending rapidly. Both men grabbed the handrails as the car swayed alarmingly. East Wing Junction is 10 floors below us, Vincent said, eyes fixed on the floor indicator. We'll need to cross there, then go back up to 36. The elevator pinged as they passed the 40th floor, then abruptly ground to a halt, emergency lights bathing them in red. Power interruption, Vincent muttered, frantically working the controls. Backup generators should. With a sickening lurch, the elevator dropped several feet before catching itself. Both men were thrown to the floor. Kick in, Vincent finished, pulling himself up. The elevator resumed its descent, but slower, the machinery groaning in protest. How bad is it? Marcus asked quietly as they approached the junction level. Vincent's face was grim. Worse than I initially calculated. Structural sensors are showing cascading failures throughout the East Wing. Those renovation contractors cut corners. They compromised the main support column trying to save costs. How do you know this? I've been documenting it for weeks, sending reports up the chain. No one listened. There was no accusation in Vincent's voice, just resigned fatigue. By the time I gathered enough evidence to force a shutdown, it was too late. The damage accelerated overnight. The elevator doors opened onto the 37th floor junction, the connecting point between the main tower and the East Wing. The wide corridor that normally served as a busy thoroughfare was deserted, floor visibly tilted. We need to go up one floor, Vincent said. Stairs are this way. They ran down the corridor, the building swaying beneath their feet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see emergency vehicles converging on the plaza below, their lights casting pulsing red and blue reflections. As they reached the stairwell, a deafening crack split the air. The floor beneath them buckled, a jagged fissure racing across the polished marble. Vincent shoved Marcus through the stairwell door just as a section of the corridor collapsed, leaving a gaping hole where they had been standing seconds before. Go! Vincent shouted, pushing Marcus up the stairs. They burst onto the 36th floor, the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of electrical fires. Emergency lights provided the only illumination in the otherwise dark corridor. Conference room C, Marcus coughed, squinting through the haze. This way. They rounded a corner to find the conference room, an elegant space with glass walls and a spectacular view of the city. Inside, 8 people sat around a polished table, faces illuminated by a presentation screen, completely unaware of the catastrophe unfolding around them. Marcus pounded on the glass door. The occupants looked up, startled. One of them, a woman in a crisp charcoal sutros, and approached the door, irritation evident in her stride. What is the meaning of, she began as she opened the door. Building collapse, Marcus cut her off. Evacuate now. Follow us. Confusion rippled through the room. A silver-haired man stood. Marcus Langley? Is this some kind of exercise? Before Marcus could respond, the building gave a violent shudder. The glass walls of the conference room cracked from floor to ceiling in a spiderweb pattern. The view outside shifted sickeningly as the entire floor tilted another degree. Now! Marcus roared, his CEO voice cutting through the confusion. Leave everything! This time there was no hesitation. The investors scrambled from their chairs, abandoning tablets, portfolios, and coffee cups. Vincent herded them into the corridor as Marcus counted heads. The main stairwell will be compromised, Vincent said. We need the service stairs at the back. They moved as a group through the darkened corridor. Marcus in the lead, Vincent bringing up the rear. The floor groaned beneath them with each step. How far to the service stairs? One of the investors called, voice tight with fear. End of this corridor, then left, Vincent replied. They had covered half the distance when the overhead lights flared briefly, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, someone screamed. Keep moving, Marcus commanded, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. Stay together. A thunderous boom shook the building, and the floor dropped several inches beneath their feet. Everyone stumbled, grabbing at walls and each other for support. The upper floors are starting to go, Vincent shouted. We're running out of time. They reached the junction where the corridor turned left toward the service stairs. Marcus rounded the corner first, stomped dead. The corridor ahead had collapsed entirely, leaving nothing but a yawning chasm. Back, he yelled, turning to the group. We need another way. Vincent pushed forward, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of emergency lighting. He looked at the destruction, then pulled out his phone and brought up a schematic of the floor. Maintenance shaft, he said, pointing back the way they had come. 2 doors past the conference room. It'll be tight, but it connects to the main tower. As they retraced their steps, Marcus felt the building's movement becoming more pronounced. The entire structure seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting with sickening regularity. They reached the maintenance door, a narrow metal panel that Vincent unlocked with his keycard. Behind Behind it was a tight vertical shaft filled with pipes and electrical conduits. A narrow metal ladder ran along one wall, disappearing into darkness above and below. "This connects directly to the main tower," Vincent explained. 30-foot climb down, then across. The investors looked at the cramped space with undisguised terror. "There's no other option," Marcus said firmly. "This is our way out." The building answered with another violent tremor. Ceiling panels crashed down around them, and the distant sound of breaking glass echoed through the corridor. "Time's up," Vincent said quietly to Marcus. "The east wing is going." "I'll go first," Vincent said, already swinging onto the ladder. "Mr. Langley, you bring up the rear. Make sure everyone keeps moving." Marcus nodded, turning to the investors. "One at a time. Move quickly but carefully." The silver-haired man who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "I'm Edward Klein, head of the delegation. I'll make sure my people follow." His authoritative tone suggested someone used to command, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Vincent descended the ladder with practiced ease, disappearing into the dimly lit shaft. One by one, the investors followed, their expensive suits collecting grime as they squeezed into the narrow passage. The woman in the charcoal suit hesitated at the entrance. "Can't," she whispered, her face ashen. "I'm claustrophobic." Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "What's your name?" "Sophia Chun, VP of International Finance." "Sophia, I understand your fear, but right now that shaft is the only thing standing between us." A violent tremor cut him off. The floor beneath them dropped several inches, throwing them both against the wall. Down the corridor, a section of ceiling collapsed with a thunderous crash. "That," Marcus finished grimly. "Your choice is simple. Face your fear or face that." Sophia stared at the crumbling corridor, then at the dark shaft. She took a deep breath and climbed onto the ladder. "I'll be right behind you," Marcus assured her. As the last investor disappeared into the shaft, Marcus took one final look at the East Wing corridor, a gleaming showcase of Langley Industries' prosperity, now fracturing before his eyes. The building gave another shudder, and he quickly entered the maintenance shaft, pulling the door closed behind him. The climb down was harrowing. The ladder vibrated with each tremor, and the shaft was barely wide enough for a person to fit between the conduits and pipes. The only illumination came from emergency lights at 10-foot intervals, casting everything in a ghostly red glow. Below him, Marcus could hear Sophia's ragged breathing as she fought her claustrophobia. Above the sound of their movement came the building's death throes, the screech of twisting metal, the crack of breaking concrete, the tinkling cascade of shattered glass. After what seemed an eternity, Marcus heard Vincent's voice echoing up the shaft. "We're at the crossing point." Everyone threw quickly. The shaft widened into a small maintenance junction. Vincent stood by an open panel that revealed a horizontal tunnel, the connection to the main tower. The investors were crawling through one by one. "The East Wing's structural integrity is failing completely," Vincent reported as Marcus reached the junction. "We have minutes at most before total collapse." Sophia emerged from the ladder just as the building gave its most violent shake yet. She lost her grip and fell the last few feet, landing hard on the metal grating. Marcus helped her up. "Almost there," he encouraged, guiding her toward the tunnel. The junction groaned, metal supports bending under impossible strain. A pipe burst overhead, showering them with frigid water. "Go!" Vincent shouted, pushing them toward the tunnel. Marcus helped Sophia through, then turned back. Vincent remained by the ladder, looking up the shaft. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "We need to go." "There's someone else," Vincent replied, eyes fixed on the shaft above. "I heard them calling." Marcus strained to listen. Through the cacophony of the dying building, he caught it, a faint cry for help. "I'm going back," Vincent said, already moving to the ladder. "No." Marcus grabbed his arm. "The structure is about to go. Whoever it is, it's a human life." Vincent cut him off, his eyes hard. "I don't leave people behind." Before Marcus could respond, a figure appeared on the ladder above. A young woman in a security uniform, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. "Help!" she gasped, her grip on the ladder faltering. Vincent was up the ladder in seconds, supporting her as she made the final descent. "Officer Diaz," he greeted her, recognition in his voice. "What happened?" "Checking, final sweep, Ceiling collapsed," she managed between labored breaths. "Everyone else is out, I think." The junction gave another metallic groan, more ominous than before. The tunnel entrance to the main tower began to distort, the metal frame bending inward. "Now we go," Vincent said, helping Officer Diaz toward the tunnel. Marcus crawled through first, then helped pull the injured security officer through the narrowing passage. Vincent came last, barely squeezing through as the tunnel began to collapse behind him. They emerged into a maintenance room in the main tower, where the investors waited, huddled together in shock and disbelief. The contrast was immediate. While the East Wing had been in full collapse, the main tower seemed eerily calm, the emergency lights steady, the floor solid beneath their feet. "The main tower's foundation is separate," Vincent explained, seeing their confusion. "The renovations only affected the East Wing." Sophia helped Officer Diaz to a chair, using a first aid kit from the wall to tend to her head. "We still need to evacuate," Marcus reminded everyone. "The main tower could be compromised if the East Wing collapses against it." Vincent checked his phone. "Emergency stairwell is 2 corridors over. It should take us straight to the ground floor." As they prepared to move, a deafening crack split the air, followed by a sound like thunder. The floor beneath them trembled, but held. "That's it," Vincent said quietly. "The East Wing just went." Marcus moved to a small window that overlooked the plaza. What he saw stole his breath away. The gleaming East Wing of Langley Industries, 38 floors of architectural brilliance, home to research divisions and international operations, was collapsing in on itself in a horrifying ballet of destruction. Floor by floor, the structure pancaked downward, a cloud of dust and debris billowing outward. My God, Edward Klein breathes, joining Marcus at the window. If we'd stayed, single quotes, we need to keep moving, Marcus said, turning from the devastating sight. Vincent lead the way. They moved through the silent corridors of the main tower, the emergency lighting casting long shadows. The stairwell was eerily empty, their footsteps echoing in the concrete chamber. Everyone else must be out already, Officer Diaz said between labored breath, leaning heavily on Sophia. They descended floor after floor, the relative calm of the main tower almost more unnerving than the chaos they'd fled. After 20 minutes of steady progress, they reached the 10th floor when Vincent's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It's the emergency response team, he said, reading the screen. They're doing a final sweep of the building. They've detected structural stress in the main tower's lower floors from the impact of the east wing collapse. Marcus took the phone. This is Langley. We have 9 people on the 10th floor, stairwell C, heading down. 1 injured. Copy that, Mr. Langley, came the response. Be advised, we're detecting instability in stairwell C below the 5th floor. Recommend you exit at floor 6 and cross to stairwell A. Vincent took his phone back, frowning. Stairwell A is on the opposite side of the building. We don't have a choice, Marcus said. Officer Diaz, can you make it? The security officer nodded grimly, though her face was pale from blood loss. They continued their descent, the stairwell growing noticeably warmer as they approached the lower floors. When they reached the 6th floor, Vincent held up his hand, stopping the group. Listen, he said. A low, ominous groan emanated from the stairwell below, accompanied by the unmistakable crackle of fire. The collapse must have ruptured gas lines, Vincent realized. Fires spreading through the lower floors. Marcus pushed open the 6th floor door. The corridor beyond was hazy with smoke, but not yet impassable. Stairwell A, he said. How do we get there? Vincent consulted the building schematic on his phone. Main corridor, then right at the junction. It's past the executive dining room. Marcus turned to the group. Stay low, move quickly, and stay together. They moved into the smoke-filled corridor, handkerchiefs and sleeves pressed to mouths and noses. The investors, who hours earlier had been considering multi-million-dollar fundings in a climate-controlled conference room, now crouched and stumbled through the smoke, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. The building shuddered again, the floor beneath them vibrating ominously. From somewhere below came the sound of breaking glass and buckling metal. Hurry, Vincent urged as they approached the junction. They turned right and stopped dead. Ahead, where the corridor should have continued towards stairwell A, a wall of flame blocked their path. The heat hit them like a physical wall, forcing everyone back several steps. The flames had engulfed the entire corridor, licking at the ceiling and consuming everything in their path. Back! Marcus shouted over the roar of the fire. We need another route. Vincent was already consulting his phone, fingers flying across the schematic. The executive dining room, he said. It has a service corridor that connects to the north wing. We can reach stairwell A from there. They retreated down the corridor, the smoke growing thicker with each passing second. Officer Diaz stumbled, her injured leg giving out beneath her. Edward Klein caught her before she fell, supporting her weight against his shoulder. This way, Vincent called, pushing open a set of double doors emblazoned with the Langley Industries logo. The executive dining room was a study in corporate luxury white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Now it was eerily abandoned, half-eaten meals still on table, chairs pushed back in haste. Service entrances through the kitchen, Vincent said, leading them past the Mater D's station. As they moved through the dining room, a violent tremor shook the building. The massive chandeliers swayed ominously, tinkling as crystals collided. A spiderweb of cracks raced across the windows. Move faster, Marcus urged, helping Sophia guide Officer Diaz. They pushed through swinging doors into the gleaming industrial kitchen. Pots still simmered on burners abandoned in the evacuation. Vincent quickly shut off the gas lines before leading them toward a nondescript door at the far end. Service corridor, he explained, pushing it open. Staff use it to move between wings without being seen by executives. The narrow passageway was utilitarian and plain a stark contrast to the opulence they'd just left. Emergency lighting cast the white-tiled corridor in a dim reddish glow. They moved swiftly, the relative safety of the service corridor bolstering their spirits. After several turns, Vincent stopped at another door. This should put us in the north wing, one corridor away from stairwell A. He pushed the door open cautiously. The corridor beyond was clear of smoke, but water rained down from activated sprinklers, soaking the carpet. The fire suppression system is working here, Vincent noted with relief. This way. They moved through the wet corridor, shoes squishing on the saturated carpet. The water was a blessing and a curse clear of smoke, but treacherously slippery. Sophia suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. Listen, she whispered. Above the hiss of sprinklers and distant rumble of the building's distress, another sound became audible. A human cry, weak but persistent. Help, please. Help, single quotes. Vincent was already moving, following the sound to a nearby office. The door was jammed, the frame warped by the building's shifting. "Someone's in there," he said, ramming his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. Marcus joined him, and together they slammed into the door. On the third attempt, the frame splintered and the door gave way. Inside, a young man in a mailroom uniform lay pinned beneath a fallen shelving unit. His face was pale with shock, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Danny Vincent recognized him immediately. Mailroom clerk, new hire. Marcus and Vincent lifted the shelving unit while Edward and another investor pulled Danny free. The young man cried out in pain as they moved him. Compound fracture, Officer Diaz assessed professionally despite her own injury. "He can't walk. I'll carry him," Edward volunteered, surprising everyone. The silver-haired executive knelt beside Danny. "Put your arms around my neck, son," with surprising strength for a man in his 60s. Edward lifted Danny in a fireman's carry. "Stairwell A is just ahead," Vincent urged, checking his phone. "The emergency services have cleared a path to the ground floor. They're waiting for us." They continued down the corridor, the group now moving slower with 2 injured members. Water continued to rain down from the sprinklers, plastering expensive suits to bodies and washing away the veneer of corporate hierarchy. The stairwell door was in sight when the building gave another violent shudder. The ceiling above them bulged downward, plaster cracking. "Run!" Marcus shouted. They broke into a sprint, Marcus helping Officer Diaz while Edward staggered forward with Danny. Vincent reached the stairwell door first, yanking it open. "Inside, now!" They piled in just as the ceiling collapsed behind them, an avalanche of debris blocking the corridor they'd vacated seconds earlier. The stairwell was concrete and steel, designed to withstand the worst. It felt solid compared to the shifting, groaning structure around it. "Ground floor," Vincent said, already starting down. 5 more flights. They descended as quickly as their injured companions would allow, the stairwell growing warmer as they neared the bottom floors. When they reached the second-floor landing, Vincent's phone buzzed again. "Emergency services," he reported after checking it. "They say the lobby is clear, but we need to hurry. The collapse has ruptured several main gas lines. They're worried about explosions." As if in response, a dull boom echoed from somewhere deep in the building. The stairwell trembled but held. "Almost there," Marcus encouraged, his voice hoarse from smoke. They reached the ground floor, pushing through the heavy fire door into the main lobby of Langley Industries. The once pristine space was transformed, water from sprinklers pooled on marble floors. Smoke drifted in lazy curls near the high ceiling, and debris from partial collapses littered the reception area. Across the lobby, through the glass front doors, they could see emergency vehicles, their lights painting the scene in surreal flashes of red and blue. "There's our exit," Marcus said, relief flooding his voice. They were halfway across the lobby when a thunderous crash stopped them in their track. A section of the mezzanine above had given way, crashing down directly in their path, blocking the main entrance. "The service entrance," Vincent said immediately, redirecting the group. "Left, past the security desk." They changed course, skirting the fallen debris. Edward was struggling now, Danny's weight taking its toll. Another investor stepped forward, helping to support the injured mail clerk. The service entrance was a simple metal door beside the loading dock. Vincent pushed through first, holding it open as the others followed. Outside, chaos reigned. Emergency vehicles crowded the plaza. Hundreds of Langley employees huddled in evacuation zones, watching in horror as their workplace continued to disintegrate. The east wing was already gone, reduced to a mountain of rubble and twisted metal. The main tower still stood, but flames now licked at several floors, and the structural groaning was audible even from outside. Over here, a firefighter spotted them, waving urgently. They staggered toward the emergency services, finally crossing into the safety zone. Paramedics immediately surrounded them, taking charge of Officer Diaz and Danny. The investors collapsed onto provided chairs, oxygen masks pressed to their faces. Marcus turned back to look at the building, his building. The Langley legacy, built by his father over 4 decades, now crumbling before his eyes. The financial loss was incalculable, but all he could think about was how close they had come to a catastrophic loss of life. A fire chief approached, his face grim beneath his helmet. "Mr. Langley, we've completed final sweep, confirmation. The building is clear. Everyone is accounted for." A wave of relief washed over Marcus. "Everyone?" he confirmed. "Yes, sir. Your evacuation protocols work. We've got injuries, but no fatalities reported." Marcus looked at Vincent, who stood slightly apart from the group, watching the building with a professional detachment that couldn't quite mask his exhaustion. "Not my evacuation protocols," Marcus corrected. The fire chief looked between Marcus and Vincent, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're the one who triggered the evacuation?" he asked Vincent. Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just monitored the sensors and reported what I saw." "He did more than that," Marcus interjected. "He predicted the collapse, forced me to listen, and led us through the building to rescue others. Without him, we'd have hundreds of casualties instead of 0. Before the chief could respond, a deafening boom shook the ground beneath their feet. They turned to see a massive section of the main tower's facade shear away, crashing to the ground in a thunderous avalanche of glass and steel. A cloud of dust billowed outward, engulfing the evacuation zone. "Everyone back," the fire chief shouted, ushering them toward a secondary perimeter. As they retreated, Marcus watched his family's legacy disintegrate. 4 decades of corporate empire building, reduced to rubble in less than an hour. The symbolism wasn't lost on him, a structure that appeared solid, brought down by hidden weaknesses and cut corners. Emergency personnel swarmed around them, checking vitals, applying oxygen masks, documenting injuries. Marcus waved away the medic who approached him, pointing instead to the investors who were still struggling to catch their breath. "Mr. Langley," a voice called. "Sir!" Marcus turned to see Reeves pushing through the crowd, his normally immaculate security chief's uniform covered in dust and grime. "Reeves," Marcus clasped the man's shoulder. "You made it out?" "Yes, sir. I was coordinating the evacuation from the ground floor when the east wing went." Reeves's eyes were haunted. "There are no words, sir. The board members, all accounted for. They're at the secondary evacuation point." Reeves glanced at the investors. "I see you found our missing VIPs. Vincent found them," Marcus corrected, "and let us all out." Reeves nodded respectfully to Vincent, who was speaking quietly with a group of maintenance workers, checking each face with evident relief as he confirmed his team had escaped. "Sir, the press is here," Reeves said quietly. "They're demanding a statement, and I've had calls from the board chairman, the mayor's office, and the governor." Marcus hadn't considered the public relations nightmare that was unfolding alongside the physical destruction. The collapse of Langley Tower would be headline news across the country, possibly the world. "Hold them off for now," he instructed. "No statements until we have confirmation that everyone is truly accounted for." Across the plaza, emergency vehicles continued to arrive, police cruisers, additional fire trucks, mobile command centers. The perimeter expanded as authorities secured the area. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing footage of the destruction for news outlets. "Mr. Langley," a paramedic approached. "We need to check you for injuries, sir." This time, Marcus allowed himself to be led to an ambulance. As he sat on the bumper, submitting to a basic examination, he watched Vincent moving through the crowd of Langley employees, clipboard in hand, still working despite the chaos. "That man," Marcus said to the paramedic, "the one with the clipboard, get him checked too." "Yes, sir." Left alone for a moment, Marcus finally felt the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his dust-covered hair. The enormity of what had happened, what had almost happened, washed over him in waves. "Marcus!" He looked up to see his sister Caroline rushing toward him. She pushed past a police officer flashing her Langley Industries ID. "Caroline," he stood, embracing her tightly. "You weren't in the building?" "No, I was at the downtown hospital for the children's charity event." Her eyes were red-rimmed, voice shaking. "I saw it on the news. They're saying it could have been catastrophic. Hundreds dead, but it wasn't," Marcus said firmly. "Everyone got out." Caroline pulled back, studying his face. "They're saying a maintenance worker predicted it, that he stopped you from going back to your office, forced an evacuation." Marcus looked across the plaza to where Vincent now sat, finally resting as a paramedic checked his vitals. "His name is Vincent Torres," Marcus said. "And yes, he saved hundreds of lives today, mine included." A commotion at the perimeter drew their attention. A phalanx of dark SUVs with government plates had arrived, and officials in suits were being escorted through the police line. The governor, Reeves confirmed, returning to Marcus's side, and the mayor. They're requesting an immediate briefing. Marcus straightened, instinctively adjusting his tie only to realize it was missing, lost somewhere in their harrowing escape. "Mr. Langley," a new voice interrupted. Edward Klein approached, his once impeccable suit ruined, his silver hair matted with dust. "Before you speak with the officials, there's something my colleagues and I wish to say." The other investors gathered behind him, their faces solemn. "We came here today to evaluate Langley Industries as a potential investment," Klein continued, "to determine if your company was worthy of our consortium's resources." Marcus braced himself. This was it, the final blow. Not only had his building collapsed, but the international funding that might have saved the company would now certainly be withdrawn. "What we witnessed today," Klein said, "was leadership in its purest form. Not in a boardroom with prepared statements and polished slides, but in crisis, when lives hung in the balance." The other investors nodded in agreement. "Our consortium doesn't just invest in companies, Mr. Langley. We invest in people, in leaders." Klein extended his hand. "And we would be honored to partner with Langley Industries in its rebuilding." Marcus stared at the offered hand, momentarily speechless. "Mr. Klein, I appreciate the sentiment, but you should know the insurance won't cover everything. The investigation will likely reveal construction shortcuts that the company should have caught. The liability is precisely why you need partners with deep pockets and long-term vision," Klein finished for him. "We're not fair-weather investors, Mr. Langley. We recognize value when we see it." Marcus shook the man's hand, a spark of hope kindling amid the devastation. "There is one condition," Klein added. "That man," he pointed to Vincent, "needs to be part of your leadership team going forward. Anyone who can spot a structural failure before it happens and navigate a collapsing building to save lives is someone I want making decisions about my investment." Before Marcus could respond, Reeves appeared again. "Sir, the officials are waiting, and the press they're getting restless." Marcus looked around at the surreal scene, his building in ruins, hundreds of employees displaced, government officials and media circling. Decisions needed to be made, statements crafted, responsibility assigned. "Get Vincent," he told him. "I want him with me for that." As Reeves moved to comply, Caroline squeezed her brother's arm. "What are you going to say?" Marcus watched as Vincent rose wearily from the ambulance, nodding to whatever Reeves was telling him. "The truth," Marcus replied, "that today, Titles didn't matter. Corner offices and corporate hierarchies meant nothing. That a maintenance worker saved hundreds of lives because he wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. Even when no one wanted to listen, Vincent approached slowly, his reluctance evident in every step. This wasn't his world press conferences, government officials, corporate statements. He belonged in maintenance rooms and service corridors, not in front of cameras. Murray. Langley, I don't think I should, Vincent. Marcus cut him off gently. I need you there. You're the only one who truly understands what happened today. A flicker of resolution crossed Vincent's face. He nodded once, standing straighter despite his exhaustion. Together they walked toward the impromptu command center where the governor, mayor, and various officials waited. Camera crews jostled for position, boom microphones extended overhead like curious antennae. The once orderly plaza had transformed into a chaotic media circus, with Langley Tower's smoldering ruins as the macabre backdrop. The governor stepped forward, hand extended. Mayor Langley, Governor Raymond Heller. A terrible tragedy. Simply terrible. Marcus shook his hand, noting the practiced concern on the politician's face. Governor, thank you for coming personally, of course. Langley Industries is a cornerstone of our state's economy. The governor glanced at the cameras, ensuring they captured his compassionate expression. The people want answers. They need reassurance. Marcus felt a flash of irritation. The building had barely finished falling, and already the political machinery was spinning up. I'll address the press shortly, he said. But first I'd like you to meet Vincent Torres. He's the man who predicted the collapse and initiated the evacuation that saved hundreds of lives. The governor turned to Vincent, momentarily caught off guard by the introduction of someone so clearly not from the executive ranks. But political instinct took over, and he enthusiastically shook Vincent's hand. A hero, he proclaimed loudly enough for nearby cameras to catch. The state will certainly be recognizing your bravery, Mr. Torres. Vincent nodded uncomfortably. Thank you, sir, but I was just doing my job. A fire battalion chief joined their circle, helmet tucked under his arm. Mr. Langley, we've completed our preliminary assessment. The building is still highly unstable. We'll need to maintain this perimeter for at least 72 hours while demolition experts evaluate the remaining structure. Understood, Marcus replied. Whatever resources you need, they're yours. Sir, Reeves interrupted quietly. The press secretary has prepared a statement. He recommends emphasizing the successful evacuation and downplaying the structural failures until the investigation. Marcus took the offered tablet, scanning the carefully crafted corporate statement. It was perfect PR speak, expressing concern while admitting no fault, promising cooperation while making no commitments, highlighting the miracle of survival while glossing over the catastrophe that necessitated it. He handed the tablet back to Reeves. I won't be using this, the press secretary hovering nearby blanched. Sir, with all due respect, in situations like this, precise language is crucial. Legal liability. I understand the implications, Marcus cut him off, but I won't hide behind corporate doublespeak today. The assembled officials exchanged concerned glances as Marcus stepped toward the press barricade. Vincent hesitated, but Marcus gestured for him to follow. Caroline fell in step on her brother's other side, a silent show of family solidarity. The moment Marcus approached, the press corps erupted in a cacophony of shouted questions and camera flashes. Miss Langley, was this collapse preventable? How many casualties, Mr. Langley? Is it true Langley Industries ignored safety warnings? Who's responsible for this catastrophe? Marcus raised his hands, calling for quiet. Surprisingly, the journalists complied, an expectant hush falling over the crowd. Today, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Langley Tower suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The east wing has collapsed entirely and the main tower has sustained significant damage. He paused, scanning the sea of faces. The miracle, and I use that word deliberately, is that there have been no fatalities. Every person who was in that building when the crisis began is now accounted for. A murmur of surprise rippled through the press corps. This outcome wasn't luck, Marcus continued. It was the result of one man's vigilance and courage. He gestured to Vincent. This is Vincent Torres, head of building maintenance. Hours ago, he monitored structural sensors that indicated an imminent collapse. When his warnings through proper channels went unheeded, he came directly to the executive boardroom and interrupted a meeting to alert us. Vincent stared at his shoes, uncomfortable with the attention. Mr. Torres didn't just predict the collapse, Marcus continued. He led the evacuation, guided people to safety, and went back into a failing structure to rescue others. He is the reason we're talking about property damage today instead of loss of life, a reporter called out. M.R. Langley. Early reports suggest renovation work in the East Wing may have compromised structural integrity. Did Langley Industries cut corners on safety? The press secretary visibly tensed. This was exactly the kind of question his prepared statement had been designed to deflect. Marcus met the reporter's gaze directly. The investigation is just beginning, but I will tell you this. If corners were cut, if warnings were ignored, if protocols were bypassed, that happened under my watch, and the responsibility is ultimately mine. The admission sent another ripple through the crowd. Behind him, Marcus could feel the collective tension of the corporate and government officials. But today is not about assigning blame, he continued. It's about acknowledging what we nearly lost, and what was saved by the actions of individuals like Vincent Torres. Another reporter raised her hand. Mr. Torres, can you tell us what you saw that alerted you to the danger? Vincent glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. The building has a network of structural integrity sensors, Vincent explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about his area of expertise. For weeks, I'd been logging anomalous readings in the East Wing support column. The renovation project had removed more load-bearing elements than the plan specified. And you reported these concerns? The reporter pressed. Multiple times, Vincent confirmed. To project managers, to facility directors, to safety inspect. The warnings were ... minimized. Ignored, you mean, the reporter clarified. Vincent's silence was answer enough. Another reporter called out, Mr. Langley, will heads roll for this catastrophic failure? Marcus stepped forward again. Today, I care about the heads that were saved, not the ones that might roll. But I promise you this, Langley Industries will conduct a thorough, transparent investigation. We will cooperate fully with all regulatory bodies, and we will rebuild. Not just our physical structure, but our corporate culture. He looked at Vincent, then back to the press. Starting today, Vincent Torres will be heading a newly created division of structural integrity and employee safety, reporting directly to me. Because clearly when he speaks, we all need to listen. Vincent's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. Before he could protest, Governor Heller stepped forward, political instincts recognizing a positive narrative to attach himself to. The state fully supports this commitment to transparency and safety, he announced, and we will be awarding Mr. Torres the Governor's Medal of Valor for his heroic actions today. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus fielding questions about rebuilding plans, employee displacement, and corporate restructuring. Throughout it all, Vincent stood silently at his side, a visible symbol of the appended corporate hierarchy. When they finally stepped away from the barrage of cameras and microphones, Vincent pulled Marcus aside. Miss Langley, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm a maintenance worker. Not an executive, he said, his voice low but urgent. I don't belong in a boardroom. Marcus studied the man before him. Exhausted, covered in dust and grime, yet possessing a quiet dignity that many of his actual executives lack. Vincent, 8 hours ago I would have agreed with you, he replied. But that was before you saved hundreds of lives by having the courage to speak up when no one would listen. I just did my job. No, Marcus shook his head. Your job was to log the sensor readings and file reports up the chain of command, which you did repeatedly. What you did today went far beyond your job description. Vincent fell silent, unable to argue the point. The division I mentioned isn't just a PR move, Marcus continued. It's something I should have created years ago. And you're exactly the person. Before Vincent could respond, Caroline approached, her expression grave. Marcus, the board is convening an emergency session. They've set up in the Westridge Hotel across town. They're expecting you in 30 minutes. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The board would be in full damage control mode, calculating stock devaluations and liability exposure rather than counting the lives saved. They've also requested all maintenance records and structural inspection reports from the past 5 years, Caroline added, glancing at Vincent. Already sent them to the emergency response team, Vincent replied. Full digital copies of everything, including my personal logs of the sensor anomaly. Caroline raised an eyebrow, impressed by his foresight. That's ... uncommonly thorough. That's Vincent, Marcus said simply. He turned back to the maintenance chief. I need you to come with me to the board meeting. Single quotes. Vincent's expression shifted from reluctance to resolve. Yes, sir. 40 minutes later, their convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the Westridge Hotel's private end. Reeves had arranged for clean clothes to be waiting, allowing Marcus, Vincent, and Caroline to at least wash the dust from their faces and change into presentable attire before facing the board. Vincent looked uncomfortable in the borrowed dress shirt and slacks, tugging at the collar as they rode the elevator to the penthouse conference room. Just tell them exactly what you told me, Marcus advised. Every warning you filed, every response you received. Don't sugarcoat anything. The elevator doors opened directly into an opulent conference space where 15 men and women in impeccable business attire sat around a massive mahogany table. Their quiet murmurs ceased abruptly as Marcus entered with Vincent and Caroline. Lawrence Thornton, the board chairman, rose to his feet. At 72, he retained the commanding presence that had made him a legend in corporate America. Marcus, he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. His gaze shifted to Vincent, a flicker of distaste crossing his features. I wasn't aware you were bringing ... additional personnel. This is Vincent Torres, Marcus replied evenly. Head of building maintenance and the man responsible for preventing hundreds of deaths today. His testimony is essential to understanding what happened. Thornton's lips thinned. This is a closed board session to discuss corporate strategy and liability containment, not an investigative hearing. With all due respect, sir, Vincent spoke up, his quiet voice somehow filling the room. You can't discuss liability containment without understanding the liability. A tense silence followed. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with a maintenance worker addressing them so directly. Mr. Torres, Thornton said finally, perhaps you could wait outside while we... No, Marcus interrupted. Vincent stays. Everything we discussed today he'll hear eventually during the investigation. Better to have the facts now than make decisions based on assumptions, Thornton held. Marcus's gaze for a long moment before relenting with a curt nod. Very well. Please, sit. They took their seats, Vincent visibly out of place among the power suits and luxury watches. Caroline discreetly pushed a glass of water toward him. The situation is grave, Thornton began without preamble. Initial stock projections show a 40% drop when markets open tomorrow. Our insurance carriers are already positioning to deny full coverage based on negligence clauses. 3 major clients have already contacted me personally to terminate their contracts. A silver-haired woman at the far end of the table, Ian Mercer, chief legal officer, picked up the thread. We're looking at potential liability in the billions. Not just property damage, but business interruption for dozens of companies housed in the tower. If a single fatality had occurred, single quotes, she shook her head grimly. But there weren't any fatalities, Marcus pointed out. Thanks to Vincent. Yes, well, that's fortunate, Mercer conceded, barely glancing at Vincent. Nevertheless, the lawsuits will begin filing tomorrow. We need a unified strategy. I've reviewed the preliminary reports, another board member interjected. The renovation project that apparently compromised the structure was approved under standard protocols. All regulatory permissions were obtained. Our legal exposure is absolute, Vincent cut in, his quiet voice stopping the corporate jargon cold. I'm sorry, but that's simply not accurate. The board members stared at him, some with open hostility, others with curiosity. Vincent pulled a tablet from his bag, sliding it across the table. These are copies of 17 separate warnings I've filed over the past 8 weeks, documenting structural sensor anomalies in the East Wing. Each one was acknowledged, marked as reviewed, and then shelved. Mercer's face tightened. Mr. Torres, with all due respect, you're not an engineer or an architect. These anomalies could have been... I have a master's degree in structural engineering from MIT, Vincent interrupted calmly. I took the maintenance position 4 years ago when my wife became ill. The healthcare benefits were better than what I could get as a freelance consultant. Another silence, this one shocked rather than hostile. Marcus himself hadn't known this detail about Vincent's background. Thornton recovered first. Why wasn't this information shared with the board? It was, Vincent replied, on page 238 of the quarterly safety report. Under maintenance concerns, non-critical. I flagged it as critical, but it was downgraded before reaching you. Marcus watched the realization spread across the board members' faces. There would be no containing this, no spinning it away, no burying it under legal maneuvering. The facts were too stark, the paper trail too clear. Thornton leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Downgraded by whom? Richard Keller, Vincent replied. Vice President of Operations. All eyes turned to Keller, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who sat halfway down the table. His face had gone pale. The contractors were already 3 weeks behind schedule, Keller said defensively. The sensor readings were within acceptable parameters according to the project engineers. Torres was being overly cautious. Overly cautious? Carolyn repeated incredulously. The building collapsed, Richard. No one could have predicted. I predicted it. Vincent interrupted, his voice still calm but tinged with an undercurrent of controlled anger. I didn't just send reports. I met with you personally 3 times. I showed you the progressive degradation of the support columns. I brought you the actual sensor. Keller's eyes darted around the table, seeking allies and finding none. The renovation budget was already 20% over. The board made it clear that further delays were unacceptable. We meant financial delays, not safety compromises, Thornton snapped. Marcus watched the dynamics shift as the board members mentally calculated their own culpability. They had pushed for results, demanded efficiency, prioritized speed over thoroughness, but always with the unspoken assumption that safety protocols were being followed. What's done is done, Marcus said, bringing the focus back to the present. We need to move forward. First priority is taking care of our employees. We have over 3,000 people who just lost their workplace. Mercer nodded. HR is already securing temporary office space across the city. Essential operations can be relocated within 48 hours. Not good enough, Marcus replied. I want relocation plans for every division by tomorrow morning. Full salary continuation for all employees, regardless of whether we can place them immediately. And comprehensive trauma counseling services available starting today, Marcus, Thornton cautioned. The financial implications of such a sweeping are irrelevant compared to what we owe our people, Marcus finished firmly. They just watched their workplace collapse. They could have died today. The least we can do is ensure they don't also lose their livelihoods. A murmur of agreement rippled through the board. Members, whatever their concerns about costs, none wanted to be seen opposing support for traumatized employees. Second, Marcus continued, we need absolute transparency with the investigation. Every document, every email, every inspection report, everything goes to the investigators without redaction. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. There are proprietary considerations. There are human considerations, Marcus countered. If we hide anything at all, it'll eventually come out and the damage to our reputation will be irreparable. Vincent spoke up again. The structural sensors continued transmitting data until the collapse. That information will be invaluable to the investigation and to preventing similar failures in other buildings. Several board members nodded, recognizing the broader implications. This wasn't just about Langley Industries anymore. It was about building safety standards across the industry. Third, Marcus said, we need to rethink our entire corporate structure. The fact that critical safety warnings could be repeatedly downgraded and ignored points to a systemic failure. He looked directly at Thornton. This is why I announced the creation of a new division for structural integrity and employee safety, reporting directly to me, and why Vincent Torres will head it. The room erupted in objections. A maintenance worker in the C-suite? Completely unprecedented. The shareholders will revolt. Marcus waited for the protests to subside. 8 hours ago, I would have shared your concerns, but that was before Vincent Torres walked into my boardroom and told me my building was going to collapse against all protocols, against his own career interests, against the natural deference to authority that permeates our corporate culture. He looked around the table. Everyone in this room holds their position because of credentials, connections, and corporate climbing. Vincent holds his position despite his credentials because he prioritized his family's needs over career advance. Yet he was the only one who saw the danger and had the courage to speak up. Vincent sat uncomfortably under the scrutiny, but held himself with quiet dignity. The division I've proposed isn't just about structural integrity, Marcus continued. It's about rebuilding integrity into our corporate DNA, and there's no one better qualified to lead that effort than the man who demonstrated that integrity today. Thornton studied Marcus thoughtfully. Your father would be proud, he said finally. He always said you had better instincts for people than he did. The mention of his father, a man whose legacy had always loomed large over Marcus's decisions, landed with unexpected weight. For once, the comparison didn't feel like criticism. The board will need to vote on the new division and appointment, Thornton continued, but you have my support. A subtle shift moved through the room as the other board members recalibrated their positions. If Thornton was backing Marcus on this, opposition would be futile. I propose we adjourn for today, Thornton concluded. We all need time to process what's happened. We'll reconvene tomorrow to formalize our response strategy. As the board members gathered their things, most avoided making eye contact with Keller, who sat frozen in his seat, the full weight of his decisions finally settling on his shoulders. Marcus, Vincent, and Caroline stepped out into the hotel corridor, the tension of the boardroom dissipating somewhat in the relative privacy. That went better than expected, Caroline observed. Only because Vincent had documented everything so meticulously, Marcus replied. He turned to the maintenance chief. You knew this day might come, didn't you? That's why you kept such detailed records. Vincent nodded. In my experience, when warnings go unheeded, it's wise to maintain a paper trail. I just never thought the consequences would be so catastrophic. A hotel staff member approached. Mr. Langley, there's a situation in the lobby you should be aware of. They followed her to a balcony overlooking the Grand Hotel lobby. Below, hundreds of Langley employees had gathered, administrative assistants, IT specialists, marketing teams, mailroom workers, all still in the clothes they'd worn during the evacuation, many still covered in dust. They started arriving about 20 minutes ago, the staff member explained. Word spread that the board was meeting here. As the employees noticed Marcus on the balcony, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned upward, a sea of faces etched with shock, fear, and uncertainty. Marcus felt the weight of their gazes. These weren't just employees. They were people whose livelihoods depended on decisions he would make in the coming days. People who had trusted the building they worked in was safe. People who, but for Vincent's intervention, might not have made it out alive. I should speak to them, he said quietly. Caroline nodded. They need to hear from you. As Marcus moved toward the grand staircase, Vincent hung back. This isn't my place, he said. They need to hear from their CEO. No, Marcus countered, gesturing for Vincent to join him. They need to hear from both of us. From the past and the future of Langley Industries. Marcus descended the grand staircase with Vincent reluctantly at his side. The hotel lobby fell silent as they reached the marble floor, hundreds of eyes tracking their every move. These were the people who made Langley Industries function day to day, the backbone of the company, and in their faces, Marcus saw not just anxiety about their future, but a hunger for leadership in a moment of crisis. He stepped onto a small raised platform near the reception desk, Vincent beside him. For a moment, Marcus was acutely aware of his borrowed clothes, his lack of prepared remarks, the dust still lingering in his hair despite his hasty cleanup. But strangely, these imperfections seemed right for the occasion. This wasn't a time for polished corporate presentation. By now, you all know what happened today, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hushed lobby. Langley Tower, our home for decades, has suffered catastrophic damage. The East Wing is gone, and the main tower is severely compromised. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some employees were seeing their CEO for the first time since the evacuation. Others had watched the press conference on their phones and knew what was coming. What you may not know is that this disaster could have been far worse. We could be mourning hundreds of colleagues right now instead of standing here together. Marcus gestured to Vincent. This is Vincent Torres. Until today, he was our head of building maintenance. Most of you probably never noticed him. He was one of those essential people who keep things running smoothly in the background while the rest of us go about our business. Vincent stared at his shoes, uncomfortable with the attention. For weeks, Vincent had been warning about structural problems in the East Wing. His concerns were documented, filed, and systematically ignored by the people who should have listened, myself included. The admission sent another murmur through the crowd, but Marcus pressed on. Today, when Vincent's sensors showed imminent collapse, he didn't file another report to be ignored. He came directly to the boardroom where I was meeting with the board of directors. He interrupted one of the most important presentations of the fiscal year to tell us that the building was going to collapse. Marcus glanced at Vincent, whose quiet dignity seemed to grow with each moment, despite his obvious discomfort with the spotlight. I'd like to tell you that I immediately recognized the danger and took decisive action, but the truth is, my first instinct was irritation at the interruption. If Vincent had followed normal protocols, if he had respected the corporate hierarchy, if he had been less insistent, we wouldn't be standing here now. The lobby was absolutely silent now. every person hanging on Marcus's words. Vincent saved hundreds of lives today by having the courage to speak truth to power, even when that power didn't want to listen. And that's a failure of corporate culture that stops with me. Marcus looked out of the sea of faces. Employees, responsibility, people who had trusted the company with not just their careers, but their physical safety. I've already announced to the press and the board that Vincent will be heading a newly created division for structural integrity and employee safety, reporting directly to me. What I haven't yet explained is what that means for all of you. He took a breath, committing himself to the path ahead. Langley Industries is going to change, not just rebuild, but reimagine what a corporate culture should be. The fact that critical safety warnings could be repeatedly downgraded and ignored points to a systemic failure that I intend to correct. A tentative hope began to replace the anxiety in some faces. First, I promise you this: every Langley employee will continue to receive full salary and benefits while we sort out temporary workspaces. No one is losing their job because our building failed. A visible wave of relief swept through the crowd. Second, we will be completely transparent about what happened. The investigation will be thorough and the findings public. If there was negligence, and it appears there was, those responsible will be held accountable, regardless of their position. Marcus saw Richard Keller standing at the back of the lobby, his face ashen as he recognized the implications. Third, we're creating new channels for employees at every level to raise concerns directly to senior leadership. The old system of filtering information up through layers of management clearly failed us. That ends today, Vincent finally spoke up, his quiet voice somehow carrying across the lobby. What happened today wasn't just a structural failure, it was a communication failure. The sensors worked, the warning systems worked, but the human systems, the ones that determine whose voice gets heard, those failed completely. The crowd nodded in collective understanding. Every person there had at some point felt the frustration of being ignored by someone higher in the corporate hierarchy. In the coming days, Marcus continued, we'll be setting up crisis centers where you can access resources, everything from temporary workspace assignments to trauma counseling. Caroline Langley will be overseeing this effort personally. He gestured to his sister, who stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. This is a devastating setback for our company, but it's also an opportunity to rebuild not just our physical infrastructure, but the way we work together, the way we listen to each other, the way we value expertise over authority. A woman in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Langley, what about the rumors that the company might not survive this financially? The question hung in the air, voicing the fear that many felt but few dared express directly to the CEO. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the legitimacy of the concern. The financial impact will be substantial. Our stock will take a hit. Insurance will cover some, but not all of the physical damage. There will be lawsuits. He paused, then continued with renewed conviction. But earlier today, our international investment partners who witnessed the collapse firsthand reaffirmed their commitment to Langley Industries, not because of our quarterly projections or market position, but because of what they saw in our response to crisis. The tension in the room eased slightly. Langley Industries isn't a building, Marcus said. It's people. It's all of you. And as long as we have our people, we can rebuild everything else. A spontaneous applause broke out, growing in intensity until it filled the lobby. Marcus saw faces transform, fear giving way to determination, uncertainty to resolve. As the applause began to fade, an older man in a maintenance uniform pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He stopped directly in front of Vincent, studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. Never thought I'd see the day when one of us got a seat at the table, he said, loud enough for many to hear. Don't forget about us when you're up there with the suits, Torres. Vincent clasped the man's hand firmly. I'll never forget where I came from, he promised. That's the whole point. The interaction rippled through the crowd. A symbolic bridging of the gap between executive leadership and rank-and-file employees that had contributed to the day's disaster. Marcus watched, understanding that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the company's organizational chart, but in its soul. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the edge of what had once been Langley Tower. The rubble had been cleared, the site leveled and prepared for new construction. Architectural renderings on the surrounding fence showed the future Langley complex, not a single towering monolith, but a cluster of interconnected structures designed with multiple redundant safety systems. Vincent stood beside him, no longer in maintenance grays, but in a simple navy suit that he still wore with slight discomfort. The transition hadn't been easy for him. Moving from the background into a leadership role had required adjustments for everyone, but his unwavering integrity had quickly earned him respect throughout the organization. The foundation tests came back clean, Vincent reported. We can begin the actual construction next week. Marcus nodded, studying the plans. And a new sensor network, triple redundancy, independent monitoring systems, direct reporting channels to multiple divisions. If anything shifts even a millimeter more than expected, we'll know immediately. A simple description that represented months of careful engineering, safety innovations, and wholesale restructuring of protocols. Vincent's new division had revolutionized not just Langley's approach to building safe, but was already influencing industry standards nationwide. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Marcus reminded him. Ready for this? Vincent's expression turned grim. As ready as I'll ever be. Today marked a watershed moment in Langley's recovery, the final presentation of the investigation findings, and the formal vote on liability acknowledgement. It would be contentious, expensive, and absolutely necessary. An hour later, the temporary boardroom in Langley's interim headquarters hummed with tension. The full board was present, along with the company's senior leadership team and representatives from the Independent Investigation Committee. Richard Keller was noticeably absent, having resigned in disgrace weeks after the collapse. Vincent stood at the head of the table, presenting the investigation's conclusions with the same quiet authority he'd displayed on the day of the collapse. "The evidence is conclusive," he stated, pointing to the detailed schematics displayed on the screen behind him. "The renovation contractors removed critical support structures that weren't designated for removal in the approved plan. When this was discovered, project managers made the decision to continue rather than backtrack, a decision that saved approximately $3 million and shaved 4 weeks off the timeline." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. More critically, Vincent continued, "When the structural integrity sensors began showing warning signs, those warnings were systematically downgraded in severity before reaching executive level. This wasn't a single failure point, it was a cascade of failure, enabled by a corporate culture that prioritized efficiency over safety." Marcus watched the faces around the table. Some showed genuine remorse. Others calculated financial implications. The company had changed dramatically in 6 months, but old habits died hard. "The investigation committee recommends full acknowledgement of corporate liability," Vincent concluded, "not just for the property damage, but for the psychological trauma suffered by employees, the business interruption experienced by tenant companies, and the broader impact on public trust." Lawrence Thornton, still board chairman despite the disaster, leaned forward. "And the projected financial impact of such an acknowledgement?" Caroline Langley, who had stepped into a more prominent leadership role post-collapse, answered, "Our financial team estimates between $1.2 and $1.5 billion in total liability. Insurance will cover approximately 60%, leaving Langley responsible for roughly $600 million. A younger board member, one of several new additions who had replaced those who resigned after the collapse, whistled softly. "That's a substantial hit to take voluntarily. It's also the right thing to do," Marcus stated firmly, "and ultimately less expensive than fighting protracted legal battles we would likely lose anyway." Diane Mercer, who had survived the corporate reshuffling largely due to her pivot toward ethical leadership, nodded. "Our legal analysis supports this approach. Taking responsibility proactively rebuilds trust faster than denying culpability and being forced to accept it later. I move that we vote," Thornton said, his expression resigned but resolute. The motion passed 12-3, a margin that would have been unthinkable in the old Langley culture. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus caught Vincent looking troubled despite the victory. "Something on your mind?" he asked as they gathered their materials. Vincent hesitated. "I've been reviewing the new construction plans again. There's an issue with the West Foundation design that doesn't sit right with me." Marcus immediately stiffened. "What kind of issue?" "The soil composition report suggests potential instability during seismic events. The current design meets code, but you think it should exceed code." Marcus finished for him. Vincent nodded, significantly, "which means redesign, delays, and additional costs." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Call the architects. Get it fixed." "The construction committee won't be happy," Vincent warned. "They've already approved the current design, then we'll have a meeting," Marcus replied. "And this time, everyone will listen." The construction committee meeting the following day turned contentious within minutes. The redesign Vincent proposed would add 8 weeks to the timeline and $7 million to the budget numbers that the committee chair, Douglas Ward, found completely unacceptable. "We're already 6 months behind schedule," Ward argued, his voice rising as he leaned across the conference table. "The insurance payouts are contingent on maintaining our rebuilding timeline. We cannot afford another delay." "And we cannot afford another collapse," Vincent countered, his voice leveled despite Ward's mounting aggression. "The current design meets every building code requirement," Ward insisted, slamming his hand on the table. "Every single one. Are you suggesting we should ignore established standards?" "I'm suggesting we should exceed them," Vincent replied, "especially given our history." Ward turned to Marcus, who had been observing the exchange silently. "Marcus, be reasonable. This redesign is completely unnecessary. It's gold-plating a perfectly acceptable foundation design." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Marcus. 6 months ago, this would have been an easy decision, accept the assurances of the construction committee chair, maintain the timeline, save the money, the path of least resistance. But that path had led to disaster once before. "Show me the soil composition reports," Marcus said, extending his hand toward Vincent. Vincent passed him the tablet, the technical data highlighted with Vincent's annotations explaining the potential risks. Marcus studied it carefully, aware of the room's tension, of Ward's impatient sighs, of the project managers exchanging nervous glances. The situation felt eerily familiar. An expert raising concerns, executives weighing convenience against caution. He looked up at Ward. "Douglas, If Vincent believes the design needs modification, we modify it. Ward's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. We can't redesign the entire foundation based on one man's overcautious interpretation of standard soil reports. That one man prevented hundreds of deaths 6 months ago by being overcautious, Marcus reminded him quietly. I didn't listen to him then until it was almost too late. I won't make that mistake again. He turned to the rest of the committee. The foundation will be redesigned to Vincent's specifications. The timeline will be adjusted, the budget will be increased. This isn't a debate. Ward gathered his papers, his movements sharp with barely controlled rage. I resign as committee chair, he announced. I won't be responsible for this unnecessary waste of resources. As Ward stormed out, the room remained silent. Then, one by one, the remaining committee members turned to Vincent. Walk us through your concerns, the senior architect requested. In detail, please. Vincent opened his presentation, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing as he realized he was finally truly being heard. Outside the conference room, Marcus paused in the corridor, watching through the glass as Vincent guided the committee through the technical specifics of his proposed redesign. The scene struck him as the perfect metaphor for the new Langley Industries expertise valued over authority. Safety prioritized over expediency, courage rewarded over compliance. 6 months ago, a janitor had interrupted a board meeting to save hundreds of lives. Today, that same man was reshaping an entire corporate culture. And Marcus Langley, heir to a dynasty built on hierarchy and tradition, found himself humbled by the simple power of listening to the right voice at the right time, regardless of its source. The building would rise again, stronger this time, safer, built on a foundation of both concrete and character. And when future generations asked what made Langley Industries different, the answer would trace back to this moment when a company learned that the most important structural integrity wasn't in its building, but in its values.